right, welcome to the show, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started with today's interactive virtual field trip. That's right, it's interactive for everyone out there today. If you're on camera or off of camera watching the live show, you can send in your text questions via the Q&A app built in the bottom of your Zoom screen, teachers, or if you like to roam around your classroom, you can also use Twitter to text in your questions. Just make sure you use the hashtag GEOshow. I do not follow my handle, so don't at me. I will not see those questions. Only the hashtag GEOshow. We also use Kahoot here on the GEOshow. So go to kahoot.it, log in with today's pin, which is 7088090. 7088090. Follow along, and if you win today's Geo quiz at the end of the show, you'll win a postcard from me, GOB, from the Learn Around the World Studios. Also, I don't know every single detail there is to know about the monuments and memorials that we'll see today. If you do stump me on a question, well, A, great for asking a fantastic, deep question. And B, I will make sure I research the answer to that question I did not know and post it over at flipgrid.com/GeoShow. All right, well, it's that time of the day. So explorers, are you guys ready?
Yes!
All right, GeoShow's now live. Let's do it, guys. All right. Welcome, explorers. You're now watching the GeoShow, and the title of today's USA edition is Washington, D.C., the Monuments Tour, brought to you by Learn Around the World. And we're kicking off today's show with a survey question using Kahoot. So make sure you get logged in, again, at kahoot.in. Enter in today's game pin, which is 7088090. We're going to go ahead and launch that first survey question. If you're not logged in yet, don't worry. These first questions are practice. They're not worth points. We'll give points later on in the show, but we do want to practice here on the GeoShow because the way we use Kahoot is we only give you 10 seconds, not a lot of time. And if you've never used Kahoot before, you must look up at the screen and not down at your device. You will only see the questions and the answers up here on the screen. Let's go ahead and practice with it and test it out. All right. So our first survey question of the day for all of you is, what state is Washington, D.C. located in? Which state is Washington, D.C. located in? Is it Virginia, Maryland, Washington, or blue? It's not a state. All right, so I tricked lots of you with that one. Okay, so it is actually not a state. Washington, D.C. stands for Washington District of Columbia. So it is a federal district. It is not a state. The state of Washington is located on the west coast of the United States, somewhere right about there. Washington, D.C. is over there on the east coast of the United States. So let's find out where it is exactly if you don't know, because on the GeoShow, location matters. All right, so often we go around the world on the GeoShow, but on the USA edition, we're sticking inside the borders of the USA. That's if you're from the USA, that is. Then it will be international for you if it's not. We're going to the East Coast today, to Washington, D.C., as we zoom in. And we're going to visit our nation's capital. Now, why is it located where it is? Well, we need to go back in time in our minds here and think about when the country first started. It was started from the 13 colonies, the 13 English colonies. They became the original 13 states. And at that time, Washington, D.C. was roughly right in the middle. It's somewhere right around there. As you can see, it's pretty much in the middle. Today, if we were making a brand new capital today, we would, if we wanted to put it in the middle, it would be somewhere out here, right? Well, at the time, it made sense. The country was not that large then, whereas compared to today. But when we think about its exact specific location, we have one man to thank for that, and that is our first president. Who here can tell me today who was the first president of the United States?
George Washington!
Right, George Washington. If you've never heard of it before, his home, the name of his home is called Mount Vernon. What's his home called?
Mount Vernon!
All right. right, so as you can see, Washington, D.C., so if you, let me paint it for you, okay? This was the original Washington, D.C. It's different today, but this is the original border of Washington, D.C. Kind of looks like a diamond or square. And George Washington lived right close to it. So in the Constitution, it said the first president was going to choose a location for a federal district. And that's what George Washington chose. The White House wasn't completed when George Washington was the president. He's the only president that never lived in the White House. John Adams was the first president to move into the White House. So, it's good to have a nation's capital this close to your home then. And but if we look at the shape of Washington, D.C. today, because I just marked out a diamond shape for all of you. Well, it looks quite different today. This is the shape of Washington, D.C. today. Why is it so different? Well, originally, it did have a perfect square shape. In fact, it was 10 miles by 10 miles. So if you do your math, that's 100 square miles of the original city of Washington, D.C. Well, the reason it does not look the same today is because, let me shade in this area over here. Bad color. All right, here we go. Okay, so the red shaded area was donated by the state of Virginia, and the blue shaded area here was donated by the state of Maryland. And before the Civil War, if you know your history about the Civil War, it was fought over a very bad thing called slavery. Well, before the Civil War started, Washington, D.C. outlawed slavery inside of the city, inside of the federal district, and that upset Virginia. Virginia was a slave state. They took their land back. So take that land back, and today we only have the land that was originally donated by Maryland. And I know what you guys are thinking. Well, why is that squiggly line in the middle? Why would you ever draw a line like that? Well, you wouldn't. That is the Potomac River that separates Maryland and Virginia, and that is why it has that squiggly shape to it. So there you go. It used to be a perfect square, but not any longer. But we are not going to talk about the shape of the whole city today. We're going to go right into the middle of Washington, D.C. to a place called the National Mall. Can you guys say National Mall?
National Mall!
All right, we're going to zoom in. I'm going to highlight. This is the Washington Monument. I just want you to keep an eye on it because we're going to talk about where things are. This is the Thomas Jefferson Monument or Memorial, the FDR Memorial. We're going to see all of these. This is the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial over there, the Lincoln Memorial. And north of the National Mall is the White House. There's the White House. And then we're going to, the Capitol is on the other far end. So this is where they make all the laws in the U.S. Capitol. And so that is known as the National Mall. And because it is a national district, a federal district, normally this would be possibly a state park, but this is a federal park. So the National Mall is actually run by the National Park Service. So the same park rangers that you would see when you go to Yellowstone National Park, the Grand Canyon, Yosemite, Acadia, the Blue Ridge Parkway, all of these different national, or the Smoky Mountains, all of these different national parks, you'll see those park rangers inside of the federal district of Washington, D.C., which is really neat to talk about. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and start our virtual field trip talking about important people. I've separated our monuments today into two groups, veterans or war memorials and people memorials, memorials for people. Before we get into it, I just want to remind everyone, we're not going to see every single memorial or monument in Washington, D.C. There's too many. There's about 65 lesser known ones around the National Mall that we're not going to see today. And we're going to introduce our own camera guests in just a few minutes after we talk about our first section. But I do want to give a random shout out first to Shelby Rising City Elementary in Nebraska. Big shout out to everyone watching from Nebraska today. Okay, let's go ahead and get started talking about, we're going to start with important people today. So if we look at the National Mall, that red star right in the middle is where the Washington Monument is. And that's where we're going to start our tour today. And we're going to walk to the reflection pool and then to the Lincoln Memorial. And then we'll go to the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial. And we'll see the FDR or Franklin Roosevelt Memorial. And we'll wrap up with the Jefferson Memorial. Okay, let's start, guys. So this is the Washington Monument, that tall column that you see on the left right there. That is called, or that shape is called an obelisk. Can you guys say obelisk?
Obelisk.
Okay, so an obelisk is like a tall column with a pyramid on the top of it, on the tippy top. So if you see that pyramid up there, okay, so the Washington Monument is a very tall obelisk. How tall is it? It's 555 feet tall, 5 1/8 inches. It was so tall when it was finished, it was the tallest building in the world until the Eiffel Tower was built. So it held the record for quite a long time. And this one is going to be the oldest one that we see today. This one was started, the foundation was laid in 1848, and it was not completed until 1884. That's 36 years. Whoa, that's a long time. Well, it doesn't really take that long to build something like this. What happened was they ran out of money. So it just sat in Washington, D.C. unfinished for a long, long time, for over 20 years. And it wasn't until they raised money up, and the Civil War happened during this time as well. So lots of things were going on. Do you guys see anything that's weird about the top and the bottom of the Washington Monument? Yeah, do you guys see how it's different colors? All right, so that happened because when they ran out of money, they were using one type of rock from a rock quarry, and then they used rock from a separate rock quarry. So rock quarry is basically a hole in the ground where you dig to take rock out of, and it just came from a different quarry. It's so it's a different colored marble to it. This is what it looked like when it was half built. This is coming from a newspaper drawing in the 1800s. And so I give you an idea of what the city looked like with this half built Washington Monument in it. And when you walk up next to it, you'll see where they've made repairs to the Washington Monument today. Some people don't often realize this, but there are earthquakes on the east coast of the United States, just like the west coast. There's more out west, of course, but there are here from time to time, and they've had to make repairs to the Washington Monument over the years, and you can see where they've made those repairs. Also, if you ever go there, there's an elevator that goes to the top, but that's actually closed down right now because they're doing repairs. It's not going to open back up until next year, 2019. So if you want to go to the top, I would suggest waiting another year to go so you can go up top in the elevator. And we'll walk by the reflection pool. And just so you know where it's at, we're going to see this right here, which is the World War II memorial in front of the reflection pool. But we're going to come back when we talk about the veteran memorials. So the reflection pool here, this one was built originally in, let's see, it was 1922. It was dedicated in 1923. And when I came here during my sixth grade field trip, this thing was nasty. It was filled with algae. There's always ducks and geese in here, and that was just leaking. And it just didn't look near as good as it does today. But the whole entire thing was redone. It was renovated from 2010 to 2012. Now it's got a nice new reflective bottom. It's about 18 inches deep on the sides. In the middle, it's about 30 inches deep. So if any of you have ever seen Forrest Gump, or of that movie Forrest Gump runs across the reflection pool, and because it's not that deep. When we turn around in front of the Lincoln Memorial, you see why it's called the reflection pool. Now, there's different reflection pools around. There's more than one, but typically when people say the reflection pool, they're talking about this one because this is the most famous one. Technically, it's called the Abraham Lincoln Memorial Reflection Pool, and it looks like the Washington Monument is right beside it, right? This is kind of an illusion. That Washington Monument is actually really far away. And that World War II memorial I told you about, that's in between on the other side. So it's really not that close. And then we have the Lincoln Memorial. And the Lincoln Memorial is on the far side of the National Mall. And the Lincoln Memorial, when we look at it, it's about 99 feet tall. This was built to honor President Lincoln, the 16th president. So Washington was the first, Lincoln was the 16th. And when we look at it, many times when we build buildings, when I say we, I mean the country, when you build buildings, usually they use numbers that mean something important. So if we look at all these columns, if you were to count all of these columns around the edge, there would be 36 columns, 36 columns. And that number is important because when Abraham Lincoln was the president, there were 36 states. So if you remembered at the beginning of the show, we said there were 13 original states. So by the time we get to the 16th president, we have 36 states. And who can tell me how many states do we have today?
50.
50. So we've gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. All right. So let's go ahead and take a look at that reflection pool and look at the Lincoln Memorial. Those steps leading up to the Lincoln Memorial, there's 87 total steps leading up from the reflection pool. When you walk inside of the memorial, you see this big giant statue of Abraham Lincoln. If you turn to the right, Abraham Lincoln was famous for his speeches, well, for many things, but he was a very good speaker. And this was his second inaugural address. So the inaugural address is the speech you give after you're sworn in as the president. So if you remember our current president, Donald Trump, last year when they were swearing him into office, and lots of people come to the National Mall that we've been learning about, people line up there and they watch him give a speech. And that's called the inaugural address. So Abraham Lincoln's second one was a very important speech that he gave. And on the left-hand side is the Gettysburg Address. And the Gettysburg Address was a speech he gave after the Battle of Gettysburg during the Civil War. And then a big old tall statue of Abraham Lincoln. When you walk out of the Lincoln Memorial, this is a very famous spot for many reasons. It's been in lots of movies, specifically when I said Forrest Gump that runs across the reflection pool there. And right here on the grounds, when you walk out of the Lincoln Memorial, you can look down and you can see this is the very spot where Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. gave his very famous I Have a Dream speech, or it's technically the March on Washington speech, but we call it I Have a Dream speech today. And he gave that on August 28th, 1963 in this very spot. And there we go. And they've even carved it on the ground as a dedication to Dr. King at that spot. When we walk in and look back at the statue of Abraham Lincoln, it's 19 feet tall and 19 feet wide, weighs 120 tons. So quite a big statue. When we look at that second inaugural address, and when you turn to the right, I want to show everyone something really, really cool. So when you come here with your parents or your friends, or even by yourself one day, you can impress the people you're with, or people that don't know this, it's already there. There's a word up here, and I'll spell it on the bottom because it's kind of hard to see. But it says E-U-T-U-R-E. And Uture is not a real word, or not one that I know anyways. Well, this was a mistake. This was a mistake. So the stone carver that carved this in the wall actually carved an E instead of an F. So it's supposed to say future. All with high hope for the future, not all with high hope for the future. So this is a cool fun fact. It's good to know about, so you can impress whoever you go to the Lincoln Memorial with one day. All right, and as we come out, that's going to bring us to our first pre-submitted question over on Flipgrid, and that's going to be,
hi, just wondering, like, how do they make all the buildings in Washington look so good? Like, there's a number of, interesting ones, like the Lincoln Memorial, the White House, the Capitol,
the Washington Monument and stuff. So, just give you a heads up. How do you make it? So, bye.
Thanks for that question, guys. That is a very good question. So one that we often get is how do they design these memorials and monuments and make them look so good, as they so well put it? Well, what the typical process today, it's changed over the years, but today the typical process is if you want to build or support a national monument or a national memorial, you typically get a group of people. This can be a nonprofit or a foundation, you get some sponsoring group, and you make a proposal, you make designs, and you propose that to Congress. And there's a committee. There's a committee that sits down every year, and they look at the hundreds and hundreds of proposals that have come in, and they will pick a win. Well, first they'll decide, do we need a monument for this cause, or do we need a monument for this person? And once they decide, yes, that is a great idea, or yes, we're going to do that, then they pick the winning design or the winning proposal. So that's typically the process. When we look at the ones like the Lincoln Memorial, the Washington Monument, some of the older ones, and definitely the Thomas Jefferson Memorial, the one that we're going to see, those were influenced by Greek architecture. That's why they have the big columns. They're marble. Well, another reason they look so beautiful, they're made out of expensive stone. And so, yeah, but there's many different designs, as we're going to see. In our next one that we're going to see, the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial, that one had over, let's see, let me get my number right, 900 designs were submitted. So over 900 designs were submitted before one was chosen. And let's see what the winning design was like. Also, I want to use this time to remind everyone, if you're watching from the outside, feel free to go ahead and start trickling in those questions. So when we open up the floor for questions, we already have some to go to from you guys. So here we go. Let's go ahead and look at the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial. Remember, I told you guys earlier that numbers have important meanings with these memorials and monuments. Well, the address of the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial is 1964 Independence Avenue. This number 1964 is important because the Civil Rights Act that was passed, it was passed in the year 1964. It's known as the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And one of the very important people that that led the charge for getting that passed and or anything passed for civil rights was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So that pays tribute to him in his address. So let's take a look at the memorial. Often I get asked, what is your favorite monument or memorial? This is my favorite. The Martin Luther King Jr. one is my favorite, and I'll tell you why. As we walk through, well, one thing, it's open all year round, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Everything's outside, so there's nothing to close down, no inside areas. So I like that fact about it. And then the other thing I like about it, if everyone looks right here on the side here, it says, out of the mountain of despair, a stone of hope. Out of the mountain of despair, a stone of hope. So that was a line from the I Have a Dream speech. And if we turn around, and right here, this is called the mountain of despair. And out of the mountain of despair, a stone of hope. So this entire design was made from a line of his I Have a Dream speech. And that's why it's my favorite. I love the design of it. And on front of the Stone of Hope is a statue of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It is a 30-foot tall statue. And coming from each side, there's two walls that come out of each side of the Mountain of Despair. And these are quotes, famous quotes from Dr. Martin Luther King. So like Abraham Lincoln, he was very famous for his speaking, and there's 14 of his famous quotes that are on these walls coming out of the Mountain of Despair. And remember, I said this is run by the National Park Service, so those are those park rangers. Those park rangers are always there to help us out, to answer questions. If we have them about, it can be about safety questions, or it can be just asking questions about the memorials themselves. They're there for education. They're like teachers. When we look at the front here and we look at Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., so this one was finished in 2011. And this was only the fourth memorial or monument in Washington, D.C., only the fourth one that honors people that was for a non-president. So most of them are going to be for presidents that we see today. So this was only the fourth one that was for a non-president, and it was the first one that was for a person of color, so someone that was not white. And so this one was very, very important and a first in many regards. So no matter where you're at in Washington, D.C., a good landmark to use is at Washington Monument because you know it's right in the middle of the National Mall. Okay, we're going to leave the MLK Jr. Memorial and walk over to the FDR Memorial. Now, FDR was the 32nd president as we walk around the water. And that's the Thomas Jefferson Memorial we'll go to next. And the FDR Memorial, right here we have years. So 1933 to 1945, those were the years that he was the president. And if you're doing your math, 1933 to 1945, that's what, 12-ish years, or I think it was over 12, almost 13 years that he was the president. Well, that just doesn't make sense now, does it? Does anyone know how many years can you be president today?
Eight.
Okay, 8 total, 8 at the most, right? 8 at the most. So you can, one term of the presidency is 4 years, and you can only be elected 2 times today. So 4 times 2 is what? It's 8, right? So at the max, you can only be president 8 years. Most recently, Obama was the president for 8 years, and that was it. So he was not allowed to run for a 3rd time. Currently, President Trump, if he wants to, he can still run for a 2nd time because this is only his 1st time. Well, this rule was not in place when President Roosevelt was in office. In fact, he was elected 4 times, guys, 4 times. He would have been president for longer, but he died during his 4th term. Now, what a lot of people don't realize about President Roosevelt, especially at the time, is that he could not walk. He was actually paralyzed in his legs from polio, and he actually made his own wheelchair out of a kitchen chair, a standard kitchen chair. And the reason he did that is because he could hide the wheels under there. You know, most wheelchairs are out to the side so you can push yourself around. Well, he didn't want that. The reason he designed it this way is so that he could put a blanket in his lap and he could hide the fact that he was in a wheelchair. And so, you know, during this time period, there was no TV or internet at this time for people to see the president speak. You only listened to him on the radio. And when he went out in public, he would ride around in cars or have a blanket over his lap sitting down. So not a lot of people knew that he was disabled. Well, they really wanted to show that off. They actually added this later on to the memorial. The National Organization on Disability actually raised the money to add this because they wanted to really highlight and show off that, you know, you can have a disability and still be known as one of the greatest presidents of the United States, which President Roosevelt is known as. Okay, his design of his memorial, there's 4 outside rooms. Remember, numbers are important in the designs of these memorials. If you recall, he was elected 4 times, 4 terms. So there's 4 rooms, and in each of those rooms there are installations and artwork. And right here we see the Great Depression, which he was the president when he came into office. The Great Depression was going on, so that's one of the things he was famous for, was bringing the country out of the Great Depression. And you know what you're not going to see today is you're not going to see any monuments and memorials specifically for women. And this is a small exception. This was his wife, Eleanor Roosevelt. She was the first lady during this time. And she was the first delegate to the UN of the United States. And that's why she is included in her husband's memorial. But she does not have her own memorial. So it's included into her husband's. But she would definitely deserve her own. And then all of the rocks falling down, this is significant because it symbolizes the chaos of World War II. President Roosevelt was the president during World War II, and that's what all of these rocks falling down represents. And this was the original statue with a cape over his shoulders, and this is why they added the wheelchair statue. People were upset that they were not honoring the fact that he was the president, even though, and he was a great president, elected 4 times, even though that he was in a wheelchair. And this is his dog, Phyla, and Phyla, this was one of the first famous first pets. He took his dog everywhere with him. And again, you can see that Washington Monument from anywhere. And we're going to wrap up today's important people's talk with Thomas Jefferson. His memorial was, interestingly enough, built during the time when FDR was president. And when we look at his has more of a classic Greek architecture design to it, and which is very beautiful and very unique. Lots of marble in there. When we look at the statue of Thomas Jefferson, who was our third president, inside, it's 19 feet tall. It weighs 10,000 pounds, and it's made of bronze. But you want to know a fun fact? That's not the original statue. The original statue was plaster, and it was painted to look bronze. And the reason it was not made of bronze was because they built it during World War II. And during World War II, all the metal in the country was dedicated for the war effort. So that means there was a ration. If you've never heard that big word, I like to think of complicated math things in terms of cookies. So imagine if you have 30 cookies and you want to ration your cookies. We're going to say each student can only have 1 cookie a day. We want to make those cookies last. We'd probably need more than 30 to make them last, I would suspect, in most of your classrooms. One of the cool things before we close down, our important people, about the Thomas Jefferson memorial design is Thomas Jefferson was famous for the Louisiana Purchase. If you want to know more about that, ask your teachers. But basically, Thomas Jefferson bought much of the country. Remember, we grew from 13 to 36. Well, much of that growing happened because of the Louisiana Purchase. So Thomas Jefferson bought a big territory from France, which they originally claimed the area of Louisiana and a lot of the areas around the Mississippi. So a lot of the rock comes from those states that were included in the Louisiana Purchase. And again, that statue is not the original. And like other presidents, like Abraham Lincoln, he was famous for his writing. And most notably, if any of you like to celebrate the 4th of July, what is 4th of July celebration of? Is it fireworks? No, it's the country's birthday. It's the Declaration of Independence that was written by Thomas Jefferson. All right, that brings us to our survey question, next survey question before we open up the floor for questions. And that survey question using Kahoot is going to be, of the monuments that we just watched and just visited, which is the most visited monument or memorial of those? Which is the most visited monument or memorial? Is it red, the MLK, blue, the Lincoln, yellow, the Jefferson, or green, the Washington? All right, it is the Lincoln Memorial. So if you said blue Lincoln, you are correct. All right, we're opening up the floor for some questions. Get those sent in. I do have a vacant, we had a no show on camera with us. So if you would like to be on camera and you have permissions to publicly do so, I'll take the first person in the chat box. But our on camera guest today, we have Mrs. Stouffer's second graders from Lecanto, Florida. Welcome to the show, guys. All right, and do you have a fun fact you would like to share with us today?
We do.
Go for it.
My name is Aiden, and when Congress is meeting in the Capitol building, there is a lantern shining at the top of the dome.
Dome. Okay, cool. And you know what? I don't even think I knew that one. That's a great fun fact. So the Capitol has a dome to it and it's lit up when Congress is meeting. How cool is that? Okay, next up we have with us today Mrs. LaShore, second graders from Bourbon, Indiana. Welcome to the show, guys. All right. And do we have any fun facts from your classroom today?
There's a bathtub in the basement of the U.S. Capitol.
There's a bathtub in the basement of the U.S. Capitol. All right, great. So lots of fun facts there coming from our exploring researchers. Thank you for sharing those. We have lots of questions coming in, so we're going to start jumping to some of those. Let's see. Mrs. Gifton's classroom asked, why did they make the Lincoln Memorial? Again, when we make monuments and memorials, typically it's a group of people get together and they say, we want to honor this person or this cause, and they present they make their claim, or they make their requests to Congress, and Congress decides if we should build a monument for them or not. President Lincoln is widely considered one of the greatest presidents of the United States. So if we're building lots of memorials for great presidents, he should definitely be included in that. So that would be my answer why they included him. Mrs. Lucan's classroom wants to know, were there models that were used to help the making of some of the memorials, and the models still around today, or the models still around today? Big-winded question there. Yes. That's a great question. We actually do a whole Abraham Lincoln show, and that Abraham Lincoln statue that you saw, there is a smaller version of that exact same statue that is like the model, and that is located in Springfield, Illinois, at President Lincoln's tomb. There's actually many little statues in there, but right when you walk into his tomb is the exact same statue. So, so great question there. And let's see, Mrs. Wanginger's classroom wants to know if I'm saying that correctly. How long is the reflection pool? The reflection pool is 2,029 feet long and 167 feet wide. Let's see, Mrs. Lucas's classroom wants to know, are there any monuments of women? Not any of the major ones. So there is a smaller one at the Vietnam War Memorial for the women that helped in the war efforts. There was the small one of Eleanor Roosevelt, but not a lot. There should be more, definitely, in my opinion. Okay, great questions coming in over on, let's see, over on Twitter. Don't see any specific ones there. We're going to shift, keep those questions coming in. We're going to come back to them and come back to our own camera guest classroom too, but we do want to introduce our war memorials that we have around Washington, D.C. And again, we're not going to see all of them. There are some veteran memorials that we're not going to see today. We're just going to see three of the more famous ones that are right in the thick of things in the National Mall. The first we're going to see is the Korean War Memorial. Then we're going to see the World War II Memorial, and then the Vietnam War Memorial. Starting with the Korean War Memorial. The Korean War Memorial was dedicated in 1995. And when we look at the Korean War Memorial, it's located right in between the Lincoln Memorial, that's right here, and the MLK Memorial that is there. So we actually virtually passed it earlier. I just didn't show it to you yet. So the design of it is, when we look down on it, is kind of a triangle layout with the reflection pool at the tip. And there is a wall right here with some images on it. It's going to be a little bit different than the Vietnam War Memorial wall that we're going to see. All right, so let's go down on the ground and check it out. So it is designed with very large stainless steel soldiers that look like they're walking through a war zone and on the march. And at the tip of the triangle is a reflection pool. And that wall that runs all the way down the Korean War has images on it. And it's 164 feet long, and it has 2,400 pictures that came from the Korean War that are etched into that wall. So these people that we see walking around in yellow shirts or yellow coats, these are actual veterans from the Korean War. And so you can imagine that seeing these images and being here meant a lot to these veterans. And these stainless steel statues that we see, well, a couple of things are happening here. The ponchos that they're wearing are blowing in the wind. That pays tribute to the cold, windy winters found on the Korean Peninsula. I can attest to that. I lived in South Korea for 3 years. It's cold and windy there. And when we look at the soldiers marching through, there's 19 of them, and they represent each branch of the military. 14 of them are dressed from like Army soldiers, 3 of them like Marine soldiers, 1 of them from the Navy, and 1 of them from the Air Force. We see that reflection pool there, and it says freedom is not free by the reflection pool. And you can get a nice shot of that wall with the different various images from the Korean War. And the day that we were here, there were wreath setouts that was dedicated to the 8th Army, as you can see right there on the wreaths, and that are honoring both the militaries from the U.S. and South Korea. That's the South Korean flag that you can see. All right, we're going to leave here and walk over to the World War II Memorial. The World War II Memorial was dedicated in 2004 when President George W. Bush was in office. It has a central pool in this one, and it has two large columns that are flanked on each side by little smaller columns. We'll see what those represent. And between the reflection pool and the main pool is a wall, a curved wall that has stars on it. And we'll learn about what those are as well. We're going to walk down this way on these green steps. And on each side of the green steps are images. And just to give you an idea where we're at, that way is the Washington Monument. And on the other end of the reflection pool is the Lincoln Memorial that we already saw. Okay, as we walk down these large grass steps that we just learned about, when you look up at those two main columns here, one says the Atlantic, one says the Pacific. So there were two main areas of fighting during World War II. One was across the Atlantic Ocean, one was across the Pacific Ocean, so Europe and the Pacific Ocean. So there's famous images from D-Day and other famous battles represented there. Among the columns that we see on both sides of those large central columns of the Pacific and the Atlantic are 56 smaller granite columns. And each one of these smaller columns represents the 48 states and other territories that fought during the war, during World War II. And that brings us to our next pre-submitted question.
Hi, my name is Brooke and I have a question for you. How many people died in World War II?
All right, so unfortunately, lots of people died in World War II, and I can't tell you in the entirety of World War II because they call it a world war because much of the world was fighting, lots of different countries. But in the U.S. alone, 400,000 people died during World War II. And if we go back and we look at, remember I told you there was a curved wall that was filled with stars. So each one of these represents, these are 4,048 gold stars. And each one of these stars on this wall represents 100 American soldiers that died during World War II. So each one of those stars represents 100 soldiers. So you can imagine that is a lot. And the neat thing is you can do when you go here is you can find your home state. My home state's North Carolina. I found mine right there. And we'll wrap up with the Vietnam War Memorial. This is a very simple design. The Vietnam War was a very unpopular war, both inside the U.S. and outside of the U.S. What's interesting enough, if you go to Vietnam, they call it the American War. We call it the Vietnam War. It's just two simple walls that are built into the side of a hill. And there's a small statue of the three soldiers, and there's a small Vietnam Women's Memorial as well. And when we take it, but the main attraction here is this wall. And the reason the design is so simple is because part of the design stipulations that said, or rules that they said, it was a very unpopular war. Lots of people were against it. Then they said it couldn't, or they had strong feelings about it. And they said it couldn't, you couldn't show anything political in it. So it was a very simple design. It was designed by a girl named Maya Lin. She was from Ohio. And it was the first one that was entirely funded by private money. And it's all it is these are not all that there is, but it's a simple design with names on it. And each one of these names, so one of the popular activities is to make name rubbings, as you saw that young person doing. Here are the three soldiers, and each one of these names are people that died during the war. When it was first finished in 1982, there were 57,939 names on this wall. Today, because people have died since 1982 from war-related injuries, there are 58,307 names that were totally on this wall. And this is a very powerful one for myself personally, because each one of these names that you look at, these were all people that have families. And it's a reminder that when you actually see someone's name and not a star that represents people, these are actual people's names. I think it really hits home of how ugly war is. And that's going to bring us to our next and final survey question before we launch our quiz. And I want to know from all of you, I'm going to give you the power. That's right, guys. You have the power. You are going to choose our next national monument or memorial. What should it be? Should it be for another president? Should it be for another war? Should it be for a woman? Did you guys see many women memorials today? Or should it be for a person in color? Right now, we only have Martin Luther King Jr. There's many other fantastic people and important people in our history that we can honor that aren't presidents. And but I want to know from you guys, what do you think? If you had the choice, what would you choose to build the next one of? Okay, so here we go. Launching that last survey question over on Kahoots. All right, so most of you are saying let's build it for a woman. You know what? I cannot argue with that. There are no right or wrong answers to this question. I'm just curious to see what you guys think, and I will second that momentum. So let's get some people together and build some more for women over in Washington, D.C. Okay, so we're going to go and ask our on-camera guests. Let's start over Mrs. LaShore's classroom. Do you guys have a question for us?
What is the biggest building in Washington, D.C.?
The biggest building. So if I'm the only one I know for sure off the top of my head, as far as it depends how you define building. I mean, the Capitol is very large. If we're going with height, it's definitely going to be the Washington Monument. The Washington Monument is the tallest building in Washington, D.C. Let's go over to Florida.
Hi, my name is Kyle, and how many pizzas is the amount of stars on that wall?
How many pizzas?
No, how many stars were on the wall that you showed a little while ago?
And how many pizzas?
Oh, at the World War II. Okay. Sorry, I was just promoting someone up. So we're going to get another guest classroom on here with us. So yes, World War II, there were 4,048 gold stars. 4,048. Okay. And if you do the math, each one of those represents 100 servicemen that died in the war. So that's a lot, right? Okay. We have a classroom joining us. Where are you guys watching from? And do you have a question?
Hi, we're from Morrison, Illinois.
All right. And what's your question for us?
No. Tommy.
When was the statue of Abraham Lincoln built?
Right. So the memorial itself was it was started in 1914 and it was completely finished and dedicated in 1922. So it took 8 years. But the statue itself, I believe, was actually made in Italy and shipped over. At least the artists were from Italy. So a little fuzzy off the top of my head. I'm pretty sure the pieces were made in Italy and it was constructed and put in place over here. But I'll see if I can get a factual answer for that and put it on Flipgrid, Lincoln statue. All right. So what we're going to do is I have a couple questions I'm going to address for classrooms we haven't addressed yet. So Mrs. Woodward's classroom wants to know, why is the elevator broken in the Washington Memorial? So they're just repairing it. They're doing different times. There's always repairs going on around Washington. So it takes maintenance to keep these things upright and to keep them safe. And so nothing was broken yet. And so we call that maintenance. We want to be proactive. We want to fix things before they break. But interestingly enough, a fun fact about the elevators in the Washington Monument, the original one was steam powered and it took 20 minutes to get to the top all the way up there. Okay. And we are going to, and another great question, why is there a DC after Washington? Washington, DC. Washington District of Columbia. So it's a federal district, and they named it Washington after George Washington. So Washington District and of Columbia. Columbia was an early nickname to the people in the Americas. And so that came from Columbian, Christopher Columbus. So District of Columbia. So this was a nickname, early nickname. So it was the Washington District of Columbia. It's a mouthful. So we just say Washington, D.C. Okay, great. So we're going to go ahead and launch our quiz. If you have time to stick around, we have lots of questions. I'd love to answer those. However, we want to go ahead and play our quiz for those of you that do need to run on with your day. And so we're going to go ahead and launch that now. Again, if you have time to stick around, stick around. If you have to go at any points, have a fantastic day. Okay, every question from here on out is worth points. Good luck, explorers. Okay, what war memorials were located on the National Mall that we saw today? Was it the Vietnam War Memorial, Korean War, World War II, or read all of these? Which ones are located right on the National Mall? Okay, it is all of these. All right, Magic Cheetah jumps out to the lead. Who chose the location of Washington, D.C.? Was it Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, Abraham Lincoln, or George Washington? Right, George Washington chose the location. Okay, Magic Cheetah still in the lead, not by much. Daring Pandas nipping from behind. Which memorial is not dedicated to a president? Which memorial did you see today not dedicated to a president? Was it the MLK Memorial, Washington Monument, Jefferson Memorial, or Lincoln Memorial? Right, it was the MLK Memorial. Agent Dragon takes the lead. FDR made his wheelchair out of a lawn chair, beanbag, kitchen chair, or piano stool. It was a kitchen chair, and Agent Dragon still in the lead. Last question, make it count. Which is the most visited monument or memorial in Washington, D.C.? Is it the Jefferson Memorial, the Washington Monument, the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial, or the Lincoln Memorial? All right, it is the Lincoln Memorial, and today's winner is dun, 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 Secret Agent Dragon. Congratulations, Agent Dragon. If you are Agent Dragon's teacher, please send me your school address. You can do that in one place only, and that's over at learnaroundtheworld.com/prize. That's the URL at the bottom of your screen, learnaroundtheworld.com/prize for Agent Dragon to get that postcard. For everyone else, if you have to head out, have a fantastic day. I'm opening up. We're going to do a lightning round of questions, and we're going to start off with, let's go to
Question.
Illinois this time. Go for it.
Go ahead, Dawson.
What's the smallest building?
The smallest building. I don't know about the smallest building. I would say the monuments and memorials. There are many small monuments and memorials. Of the ones that we saw today, smallest. I would probably have to say of the people that we saw, the smallest would be, they're all so large. The Lincoln Memorial is kind of small comparatively to some of the other ones. Yeah, I'll say the Lincoln Memorial of the ones that we saw, but it's definitely not small. But there are many small ones that's why I said there's 65 other really small ones. You know how you go to see like a McDonald's and you see Ronald McDonald on a park bench, right? Anyone ever seen that in the playground of a McDonald's? There's some memorials and monuments that are that small. It's the size of a person sitting down on a bench in like a little square or a little park somewhere around the National Mall. One right beside Thomas Jefferson, for example, pretty close to there. Okay, question that was submitted on our Q&A app. Can you swim in the reflection pool? not supposed to. I imagine you could, and it's really shallow, so it would be kind of like being in the kiddie pool, right? Let's see. Are there any plans for future memorials in the making? Yes, every year they get hundreds of designs. Mrs. Lucas's class, has anyone proposed a monument for President Obama? I would say probably someone has proposed, but I wouldn't think that would get built anytime soon. Typically, they typically, I mean, there hasn't been one of a recent president in, any of the most recent presidents. Typically, you have to wait a number of years. Usually when we look at presidents, there's a lot of people that like the presidents and don't like the presidents. It's not until later on in history that we look back and we say, oh yeah, that president was a good president. And so yeah, I don't think that it would be one built for him soon, but possibly in the future would be my guess if I had to make a guess. Great question there. Let's go over to Florida. Do you guys have a question for us?
Hi, my name is Justin. Why did they make the White House white?
I don't know why they originally painted it white, but I do know that it wasn't always called the White House. It was just painted white. No one painted it white and said, we're going to make a White House for the president and paint it white. It was painted white, and later on, it was nicknamed the White House. So it wasn't called the White House until Teddy Roosevelt was the president. So a long time later. So it was called the Executive Mansion or the President's Mansion before. It was called many things before it settled on the White House, and today we just know it as the White House. Great question. Let's go over to Mrs. LaShore's classroom. Do you guys have a question for us?
Why do presidents live in the White House?
Well, because they have, many reasons. One is because for those of you that are still sticking around, I'll show you some bonus footage, but one is it takes a lot of people to protect the president. So they have a lot of security, and also they are working, and they're working all the time. So for our classrooms heading out, and so they're working, and their office is there. So and the government is there. So they need to be in Washington to if there's any emergency, like a military emergency, they are the commander in chief. So they need to be in a place where they can tell everyone what to do. So it's logistically, which is a big word. It means, you want to, like, for example, Donald Trump, his home is in New York City. New York City it would not be a good location to be in all the time when the rest of the government is in Washington, D.C. And so that's why they live in the White House while they are the president. Great question there. Also, let's see. How long did it take to build the White House? That's a great question. The White House was started. Remember, George Washington never lived in the White House. It was started in, 1792 and was not completed until 1800. So it took eight years to build. And so there you have it. And let's go. So for our classrooms that are still hanging around with us, we'll show you a little bit of bonus footage of the branches of government. So if you know, we'll pop quiz Mrs. LaShore's class because they're the only one on camera. Do you guys know the 3 branches of government?
Yeah.
What are they? Okay. All right, great job, guys. So we have the executive, the Congress or the legislative, and the judicial. So we're going to look at where all of those offices or all those workplaces are. So first is the Capitol. This is where the legislative branch, that's the House of Representatives and the Senate, that's where they meet to make all the laws. Behind there is the U.S. Supreme Court. This is where the judicial branch works, the justices for that. If we go down Pennsylvania Avenue, this is the White House. So this is the head of the executive branch. So that includes the president and all of his heads of his departments of the executive branch. So if we look at them, the Capitol, you can see from the Washington Monument, the Capitol has a dome on the top, as we learned about from our fun facts from our classroom. Funny enough, when I was there, they were doing repairs to the dome. So if we look at it close, see all the scaffolds that are around the dome? And it's finished now, so that's no longer there. And at the top of the Capitol is a big statue that's known as the Freedom Statue. And I'll show you an up-close shot of the Freedom Statue in a minute. But again, you can walk from the Washington Monument to the Capitol. It's the other side of the National Mall from the Lincoln Memorial. And here's another reflection pool. So there are many reflection pools, but the most famous one is on the other end. Again, there's many small memorials and monuments. Here's a small one that's in the middle of a traffic circle. So there's ones all over and all around. And when we look at the Freedom Statue, this is a replica inside of the Capitol. And so the one that's on top of the dome, on top of the Capitol, the actual one, is 15,000 pounds. It's made of bronze, and it's 19.5 feet tall. It's of a female with a feathered helmet, and she's known as the Freedom Statue. Behind there is the Supreme Court. This is where all the highest court cases in the U.S. go. And if we turn around from the front of the Capitol, we can see the Supreme Court across the street. As you walk up to the steps of the Supreme Court, you may have seen it, people coming out in movies, and there's two statues to the Supreme Court, or right on each side of the steps. The statue on the left is called the Contemplation of Justice, so thinking about what's just, what's fair. And the statue on the right is the Authority of Law. It's called the Guardian. And when we look at them up close, when we walk up to the steps, the Guardian, or the Authority of Law, is on the right-hand side. So we turn around, you can see the Capitol there. And that's the Guardian holding this sword and some laws in its hand. And then the Contemplation of Justice, which also holds a smaller statue, which is when we say that if you ever hear justice is blind, there we go, blindfold around there. And this is inside the Supreme Court. So it's kind of like when you walk in, you can walk around and they have information about the Supreme Court. It's kind of like a museum in certain places. And then, but here's where the actual court is. So right at the top of the stairs when you walk in the building, that is the actual room where you go in and where the court cases are heard. And all of these Supreme Court justices, they sit up here, and they in months at a time. So generally between October and May, they hear all the arguments back to back from all the highest court cases in the land. And then from May to June, they release their decisions. And that's how that whole process works. When you walk down Pennsylvania Avenue, there's the White House. And we look at the White House today. Why do they stay here? You see all those gates and security around the White House. So you can't walk up to the White House today. You can only get this close to it. And lots of people come here to take pictures, and also lots of people come to protest from time to time. And this is in the back of the White House. So if you walk around, it's a far walk because it's a huge, huge yard. And that's the back of the White House. And you can't get up close any longer, but it was not always this way. One of the presidents that was famous for doing this was Abraham Lincoln. Draw a very bad version of Abraham Lincoln in his big old top hat. He was quite famous for giving speeches and talking to the crowds down below that would walk up and collect right outside of the White House. And in one of those last exchanges, John Wilkes Booth, the man who shot Abraham Lincoln, was down in attendance, and he said that will be the last speech he ever gives. And unfortunately, he was correct. And as we see there, you can only get so close, but if you turn around in the backyard, you can always, again, find that Washington Monuments. All right, and those are the branches of government and where they are located around the National Mall. All right, well, we've been well over an hour, so we're going to go ahead and sign out. Thank you, everyone who came to Washington, D.C. on our virtual field trip. Definitely go there one day yourselves. It's a fantastic place to visit. And go talk to your local representatives. As you get older, you turn 18, take a part of our great democracy and vote, guys. It is your right and job. All right, guys.